born into the dust and wind of the frontier. Tobias Hartwell had long since learned that kindness could be dangerous. Yet here he was, rifle lowered, reaching for a bucket of water. The man before him, an Apache warrior, was barely conscious, lips cracked, blood drying on his skin. Tobias tilted the bucket to his mouth, watching him drink as if every drop might pull him back from the edge of death. His neighbors would call him a fool. His brother back east would say loneliness had softened his mind. Maybe they were right. But Tobias knew one thing: this choice would change both their lives. The stranger drank 3 buckets before his trembling hands steadied. Color returned to his face, but Tobias's relief turned cold. The wound wasn't from a fall or animal attack. It was a bullet hole. Close range. Fresh. And whoever had fired it might still be tracking the blood trail straight to Tobias's ranch. The Apache sensed it too. He raised a shaking hand, gestured toward the horizon, then drew a finger across his throat. Danger was coming. Tobias's instinct screamed to hide the man, erase the evidence. But the warrior couldn't walk, and leaving him here was a death sentence for both of them. Then came the sound Tobias had learned to fear above all in his 12 years on the frontier: hoofbeats. Multiple riders. Fast. The warrior pressed tighter against the well's stone wall, blood seeping between his fingers. Tobias grabbed the empty bucket, dousing the blood trail, but there wasn't time to erase it all. Within minutes, maybe less, they'd be here. And Tobias, standing in the open beside a wounded man, realized he might have just signed his own death warrant. They came over the ridge like a dust storm, 6 riders, rifles catching the sun. At their head rode Marshal Dixon Webb, a man Tobias knew by reputation alone. Webb wasn't law. He was a predator wearing a badge quick to shoot, quicker to burn out a man's life if it suited him. And to him, an Indian fugitive was no different from a wanted outlaw. Tobias stood in front of the well, blocking the wounded warrior from sight, forcing his face into the calm of a man doing honest work. His mouth was dry as Webb reined in just 10 feet away, pale blue eyes cold and calculating. The other 5 riders spread out, forming a semicircle. This wasn't a visit. Afternoon, Hartwell, Webb drawled. We're tracking a wounded Indian. Blood trail leads right here. Tobias kept his tone steady. Haven't seen any Indians. Marshal. Been fixing the south fence all day. But Webb's gaze swept over the yard, missing nothing. It stopped on the dark stains near the well. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking in the dirt, hand brushing the butt of his pistol. That looks like fresh blood to me, he said. And unless you've been butchering cattle by your drinking water. Behind the stone wall, the warrior stayed motionless. One wrong sound, and it would all be over. Webb stepped closer, voice cold enough to cut steel. You know the penalty for harboring Indian fugitives. Hartwell, same as treason, a rope around the neck until dead. The air between them tightened, both men knowing a single move could turn this into a killing ground. The marshal's pale eyes stayed locked on Tobias. But before he could push further, the impossible happened. The wounded warrior spoke, not in English, but in his native Apache, low, firm, each word flowing like water over stone. Webb froze mid-step. The color drained from his face as if those words had reached somewhere deeper than fear. The lawman's hand slipped away from his pistol. When he finally found his voice, it was barely a whisper. Dear God, you're him. The warrior lifted his head, his voice now in perfect English, steady despite the pain. Tell him who I am, Marshal. Tell him why you rode so hard to find me. Webb swallowed hard. This is Ayanna, son of Chief Takakota, the man who brokered the peace treaty with Fort Richardson. The words hit Tobias like a fist. The treaty had stopped 3 years of bloodshed, saving hundreds of lives. But Ayanna's eyes were hard now, his voice edged with fire. There was an ambush. Colonel Morrison is dead, and they want you to believe I pulled the trigger. The truth slid into Tobias's gut like a knife someone had staged a murder to shatter the peace. And now, that someone wanted Ayanna buried before dawn. Webb's jaw tightened. Colonel Morrison was shot in the back 3 days ago during an Indian attack. You're wanted for his murder. Ayanna's breathing was ragged, but his words cut through the cold air. Morrison wasn't killed by my people. He was murdered by men dressed as Apache men who knew when and where we would meet. They wanted the treaty dead as much as Morrison. The Marshal's face shifted from pale to gray. He knew what that meant. Selling guns to renegades, profiting from war. Ayanna's gaze sharpened. And they sent you to finish the job. The silence between them was a taut rope ready to snap. Tobias could see Webb weighing it, orders versus truth, convenience versus conscience. Finally, the Marshal spoke. Even if you're telling the truth, I have my orders. Dead would be easier. Ayanna didn't flinch. Dead men can't testify. Dead men can't name the traitors in your government. One of Webb's deputies shifted in the saddle, his young voice cutting through the tension. Marshal, if he's telling the truth. Shut up. Bradley, Webb barked. But doubt was already cracking his composure. Ayanna's hand moved slowly to a leather pouch at his belt, pulling out a folded, blood-stained paper. This is why they want me dead. Morrison's letter names, dates, shipments. Enough to hang a dozen men. Webb's eyes locked on the blood-stained letter like it was a snake ready to strike. What does it say? Ayanna's voice stayed steady, despite the pain in his side. Morrison found the men arming renegade tribes. He wrote it all down, names, dates, amounts. And one more thing, someone in the territorial marshal's office is taking bribes to look the other way. The words hit Webb like a hammer. His face shifted from shock to sickly green. Behind him, his men traded uneasy glances. Tobias could feel it the moment when the hunter realizes he's standing in his own trap. You're lying, Webb said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Ayanna held the letter higher. Morrison told me to take this to Fort Richardson if anything happened to him. It's the insurance that would end the careers of the men who profit from war, including you. Webb took a step forward, hand tightening on his pistol. Give me the letter. Ayanna's eyes hardened. No, but I'll make you a deal. Let me reach the Apache Council tomorrow, and your name stays off the list. It was a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. Tobias saw Webb calculating, his jaw flexing as pride and fear wrestled inside him. From the left, Deputy Bradley dismounted slowly, hands raised. Marshal, about that missing rifle shipment 3 months back, maybe we should talk. Bradley's voice was calm, but his words cut through the tension. I saw those rifles 2 weeks later in settlers' hands, heading south. Not Indians. Webb's jaw tightened, but the crack in his control widened. The other deputies shifted, exchanging glances heavy with unspoken doubts. Ayanna didn't need to raise his voice. His presence was enough to keep their attention fixed. Tobias could feel it. Loyalty was shifting. And when loyalty moves, power follows. "You're all fools," Webb snarled, the mask slipping. "You think this savage's word means anything against mine?" Ayanna's gaze didn't waver. "The truth doesn't need your permission." The marshal's hand hovered near his pistol again, knuckles white. Deputy Bradley stepped forward, revolver drawn. "Stand down, Marshal." Not another step. 4 more deputies followed, weapons up not at Ayanna, but at their own commander. Only one man stayed loyal, Hawkins, his eyes like a cornered wolf's. The air between them was so tight with tension. Tobias thought a single spark could set the whole yard on fire. Ayanna shifted his weight, one hand pressed to his wound, and began to sing. It wasn't in English. It was Apache low, rhythmic, and haunting. The kind of sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The deputies froze, guns half lowered, eyes flicking to each other. Even Webb hesitated, as if some VE An Tai Li 16-9. Chat Luong An cinematic part of him understood this wasn't just music. Tobias did. The melody carried a pulse sharp, deliberate. A signal. The hoofbeats came first faint, then swelling until they vibrated through the ground. Many riders. Too many to count. Webb's face lost what little color it had left. "How many?" he demanded. Ayanna's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Enough." They crested the horizon like a rolling storm, Apache warriors. 50 strong, painted and mounted, moving in formation. But their weapons stayed sheathed. They weren't here for slaughter. At their head rode an elder whose presence alone commanded silence. His eyes locked on Ayanna, and Tobias understood this was no rescue mission. It was a reckoning. The riders formed a wide circle around the ranch. No war cries, no drawn blades, just silent, unblinking eyes fixed on Webb. The elder dismounted with the grace of someone who had never bowed to any man. His braids, threaded with eagle feathers, swayed in the wind. Every step toward Ayanna felt deliberate, heavy with history. When father and son embraced, the warriors exhaled as one. It was more than family. It was the return of a leader who had been hunted. The chief turned his gaze to Webb. "My son says you came here to murder him," he said, his English precise and cutting. Webb's hand twitched on his pistol. "I came here to arrest a fugitive from your own corruption," the chief replied. His gesture brought forth a leather satchel. Inside papers. When the warriors spilled them out, Tobias saw Webb's face collapse. Every shipment, every bribe, every letter tying him to the gun runners. "This ends tonight," the chief said. And for the first time, Webb's eyes showed something other than rage. They showed fear. Webb's eyes darted between the papers and the faces surrounding him. Every avenue of escape was closing, yet his pride refused to yield. "If I'm going down," he snarled, "I'm taking you with me." The pistol came up fast, barrel swinging toward the chief. Ayanna stepped in front of his father, ignoring the pain in his side. The shot cracked wild. Wide because Tobias hit Webb like a thunderclap. They went down hard in the mud, rage and dust mixing under the shouts of both deputies and warriors. Deputy Bradley wrenched the pistol from Webb's grasp while another man pinned Hawkins. Around them, Apache warriors lowered their weapons in unison, the danger passing as quickly as it had flared. The chief walked toward Tobias, his face unreadable, and placed both hands on the rancher's shoulders. Words in Apache followed soft, deliberate, and heavy with meaning. Ayana's voice translated, thick with emotion. He says you are now brother to our people, that your courage today is the mark of a true warrior. Tobias felt something shift deep inside. Not the pride of victory, but the quiet certainty that he'd just crossed a line there was no going back from. By the time the first light touched the horizon, Webb and Hawkins were bound hand and foot. Their weapons lay in the mud, useless as the reputations they had once carried. The Apache warriors stood in a silent ring, their presence as heavy as the wet air. Deputy Bradley handed the chief a leather satchel, Morrison's letters, unsealed, ready for the council. Tobias stood off to the side, watching Ayana's wound being bound by the tribal medicine man. The young warrior would live, and with him, the truth. The chief turned to Tobias. You will ride with us to Fort Richardson. Ayana translated, to see this justice through. Tobias looked back at his home mud on the porch, a door hanging from one hinge, the well dark and still. 8 years he'd lived here in silence, guarding nothing but his own grief. Now he had something worth defending again. He nodded once. I'll ride. The chief's eyes warmed just enough to catch the morning light. It was the beginning of a different kind of war one fought in daylight, with truth as the only weapon